Good afternoon, good Saturday afternoon. You are listening to, you are watching, you are witnessing humanity in the headlines. I am your host, Atiba Buchanan, joined and flanked by my main man, my co-host, David Seaton. How are you, sir?
Great week.
Good.
Been a great week.
Yeah, I know you out in D.C.
And let me just say, just really quickly, for those of you who are listening or who are watching who have never been to Washington, D.C., it is amazing to hear Trump talking about how we've made $7.8 trillion in the stock market. And this is the best country in the world. And bring your investment, bring your billions. And D.C. with homelessness. The capital of the richest country in the history of the world, their number one problem that I could see, cities from homeless people. And then to kind of coattail that, the hotel I was staying at, right across from there, they were building some new townhomes from the low, this on the banner, from the low price, $1,000. But you got homeless people all over the city.
Townhomes.
Hatched
townhomes.
Right. Maybe 2,000 square feet for 900 grand.
Right. Goodness. Well, I am glad you are back from your travels, my good friend. We are back after a week's hiatus. So we have a lot of words stored up today. What are we talking about today, Dave? We had a government shutdown a week ago, last weekend. That has now been averted. We are back up and running.
It is.
Right. So we asked the question today, Democrats gain from the shutdown, if anything? And did they cave? We definitely will parse that. David and I we'll chop that up in just a few minutes. And later in the show, we've got a special guest, Reverend Pastor Ronald Bonner. He's going to join us. He's kind of our go-to guy for all matters church and race related. And we talk about the continued and sustained white evangelicals, for this president, for the Trump administration, and some of the hypocrisy that comes along with that. He's going to help us dissect that later in the show. So we look forward to that conversation. You do not want to miss that. Anything else just happened this week off the top of your head that just was crazy?
Mueller, we found out.
And he's calling it fake news.
Of course,
right? News. Yeah. So
got booed at Davos actually when he said fake news.
Yeah, I saw that. I actually watched it in real time. That felt great.
Right. What's the name? Woman that's on MSNBC, I can't think of her name. She said that she came on and said, hey, he got booed, and she said immediately she got a lot of Twitter. That doesn't sound like booze. That's just MSNBC and their fake news.
I think that was Katie Hunt. Okay, well, whatever.
The brown-haired one that's on days, and I know who she is. I just can't call her name right now.
Not a problem. So nonetheless, we are just going to take a quick break to gather ourselves. When we come back, we will discuss the government shutdown. Is it fair to call it the Democratic shutdown? I think so.
Schumer shutdown.
Right, because it really was.
That's what they said.
But that's all right. We're going to talk about that. Thank you for listening to Humanity in the Headlines. Stick with us. Just give us just a quick break, and we'll be right back. We are back. So Dave, let's just hop right into it, because of course time is against us. We don't have a lot of it, and there's a lot to discuss with this today. You and I have purposely kind of not talked as much as we normally do. I just wanted to keep our perspectives fresh for the show. But I know if you're anything like me, day to day. So I'm going to start off with this. I was able to pull up a piece written in Vox by Mr. Ezra Klein. Most progressive know him. He's a MSNBC, and he wrote a piece basically saying that Democrats didn't cave. He had a few perspectives. But before I get to his piece, let me just kind of give you my visceral thoughts as we watch this unfold. Let's be fair. It was the Democratic shutdown. They are the minority party, much like in 2013, the shutdown that happened under the Obama administration was the Republican shutdown, and they did it by filibuster in the Senate. That was led specifically by Ted Cruz, although he always maintained it was the Democratic shutdown. But that was something that voters hold to be a Republican shutdown. That was done because they didn't like Obamacare, and they wanted somehow that President Obama would unfund his signature legislation. And that, how long did that shutdown last? 2-3 weeks?
Yes.
Right. So I remember the dollar amount, the hard dollar amount given to that shutdown was like $24 billion in lost revenue, or however they calculate that. But nonetheless, with that said, with that precedent there, this is the Democratic shutdown. They filibustered. They have a minority in the Senate, and that's where this shutdown came from. And from what I can tell, down based on two core principles: CHIP, which is the Children's Insurance Fund, and because that had not been funded in some months.
It hadn't been funded, and it was about to run out.
Right. And then there was also the DACA issue / immigration. Donald Trump, as president, did the executive order signed by Barack Obama that approved DACA, and he put it in Congress's lap. You can, politically speaking, there's a case for that. He could, certainly something within his purview that he could do, the ethics of it. But, legally speaking, it was definitely something within his wheelhouse. And he went about it that way. Of course, we still have one of the most dysfunctional Congresses we've ever seen, despite the tax bill that went through. They have not fixed it yet. So and I wanted to bring that up for the individuals that may not know how we got here. So that's what Democrats were pushing for, DACA being the deferred action program for as children have not committed any crimes. They work, they're in school, they are by all means ideal citizens in every sense of the word, legal status, and the President Obama gave them protections from being deported while we figure it out. And Donald Trump removed those protections officially in March. That's when they expire. He gave it a 6-month window. So we still have some time with that for them. Hopefully we make the most of it. With all of that backdrop being said,
because that was a really good recap. I just read an article today that Sheriff Arpaio, senator in Arizona for Jeff Flake's seat, he said deport them all.
Of course he did. Of course he did, Mr. Pardon.
Right.
Again, and it's amazing to me because people that have absolutely no problem receiving mercy have a complete problem extending it. And exactly. and that's we'll get into that later in our conversation about white evangelicals. But anywho, as they like to say. So my response, having watched all that unfold, you watch the polling, and 34% of Americans feel that it was the Democratic shutdown. Same percentage for Republicans, and then maybe 18 to 20% were undecided. But people, by and large, are not going to believe that this was the Republican shutdown. And we have to own it. With that said, I think we came up a little short. Now, there's certainly a conversation to be had for the long game about what is to be gained, but I'll tell you how I know we came up short. I had two markers. I was watching an interview on MSNBC, and I forget who the host was, but I know the guest, Wasserman Schultz. She's still a congresswoman out of Florida. And this was Monday. This was Monday afternoon after they had pretty much principally agreed that the Senate would go ahead and move forward, and then it would go to the House, and the president would sign it. All that hadn't been executed at that point, but it was agreed upon in principle. So she was on to talk about what the Democrats had gained, and she was asked poignantly, "What did the Democrats gain from the shutdown?" And she said, with a straight face, "We gained the opportunity for progress." That was the best answer that she could surmise at the time.
Exactly.
And then, as you and I had discussed later that evening, become more cemented. I think the Senate has certainly passed their bill. Come 8 o'clock Central Time, Rachel Maddow was on MSNBC, and her A block didn't mention the government shutdown at all. All she did was go straight to whatever the latest unprovable detail in the Trump-Russia scandal was. And again, that's not to make light of the Trump-Russia scandal. It was to say, and compared to hard actual news, certainly if she thought the Democrats won that battle, with, and this is the latest, rumor, unconfirmed source thing on the Trump-Russia gate. So with those two markers, I can only conclude. What are your thoughts, Dave?
Absolutely, we lost. The Democrats are feckless and spineless, at the very, very least. And all of this boiled down to, because even when we were having the conversation about the shutdown and who it was going to affect, there really was no conversation about who it was going to affect. All of the pundits, the political pundits, and all the conversation leading up to it was who was going to get blamed. If Democrats had enough spine to just go, if Chuck Schumer just walked out there into the camera and said, "Yes, we are shutting down the government, and here's why," I would have been fine with that. I could support that. But then to go up there and go through the whole exercise of shutting the government down over the weekend, nothing. And then, Chuck Schumer does his little dance on Monday and says, "Well, I'm taking back my offer of the wall." And then Trump says, "Well, I'm taking back my offer for protection of protecting the DACA citizens." So again, it just boils down to, again, the partisan dysfunction in Washington has gotten to the point where people are more concerned about party image than they are about actually solving problems. And that's ultimately the biggest disappointment. But no, the Democrats did not get anything in this. As a matter of fact, all they did, and then Trump gloated, that following Monday and called Chuck Schumer crying Chuck Schumer. Right. He's gloating on top of it, which again is completely within the parameters of his character. But again, the Democrats have got to pick an issue that they are going to stand for. An overwhelming majority of people, of Americans polled, agree that the DACA recipients should be protected and should be extended some modicum of either permanent status or citizenship. It shouldn't be this piecemeal 6 months, 2 years, or whatever it was, where they had to get it renewed. That's ultimately ridiculous. If you were a 6-year-old kid and your parents snuck you across the border, 16, that wasn't your fault. So, so again, having this conversation about, it gets into a larger conversation about the Republican Party, certain immigrants coming to this country, so we could, go down their road.
Yeah, absolutely.
But definitely the Democrats did not get anything from this. And as long as they don't grow a spine around an issue and just stand on it like the Republicans, the Republicans are for cutting taxes, cutting regulation, abortion. That's what they are about, and they are unrelenting when those issues come up. Democrats have issues, but they don't have an issue that they stand on that I can point to, and they say DACA is one of their core issues, or protecting immigrants, and they caved.
A little bit, and now I will defer to the article here, or refer to it. Ezra says this. He says, "And Democrats do need to shut down the government in 3 weeks. And if Democrats, need to shut down the government in 3 weeks, they'll do so the insurance program funded for 6 years," because that is part of what came out of this, rather than seeing it against them. So now that's something, is that a gain? We got chip funded for 6 years. That's something that's off the table in 3 weeks. Could that be viewed as a gain, as something that the Democrats could attribute to themselves, to their fervor in this?
Not at all, because they haven't done a good job at marketing. Very poor job of communicating that to the American people. When it comes to the midterm elections in 18, and when Trump runs again in 2020, they're going to be able to say, "Hey, we funded CHIP for 6 years. They shut the government down. They don't care about kids." But again, nobody's going to remember in November or in 2 years from now that the Republicans were the ones who allowed CHIP to expire in the first place.
Right.
So, just the messaging of the Republican Party is so superior. Target audience is completely emotionally motivated and have zero logic motivation. They've done a good job on capitalizing on that.
So let's talk about this, Dave, where shutting down the government could potentially become the new norm for the minority party, and the dangers that may impose. Ezra says in his piece, if hostage taking becomes normalized in American politics, then there's really no end to the cycle of escalation. And it's going to finish with a global economic crisis because we breached the debt ceiling or worse. Happening.
I don't think that the Republicans under this president are going to allow any to be taken by Congress that would affect or that would negatively impact the economy. Their only signature issue that they can hang their hat on. Obviously, when they came, any fair-minded individual, and you can look at the numbers, knows that the economy was rebounding for the last 7 years of President Obama's 2 terms. So Trump came in on the coattails of that, and then he at least put some confidence out there in the market that perhaps gave it a little bit of a boost. But I don't see the Republicans doing anything. I mean, if the Republican Party allows there's a debt ceiling issue and the Republicans do that, that basically means that the reserve currency of the world is going to now change. In the world, it's measured in dollars. When you look at gold, whatever it is, it's always priced in U.S. dollars, and that is a direct connection to the dollar being the reserve currency. So if that's one of the things that gives the United States its economic that it puts us in a position that we are as the number one the reserve currency of the planet. So I don't see them doing that. There was talk of that when Trump was running, saying, "Oh, we'll just ask these bondholders to take a haircut." That would throw the world economy into chaos. I don't think he wants to be responsible for that, or maybe he does.
Okay, so then what do you think of Mitch McConnell's promise for DACA by the February 8th deadline? Is there any worth in that?
No, none whatsoever. Because even if the Senate passes a bill and Trump says he's going to sign it, still got to pass the House. I mean, even the whole filibuster. Trump has made this big deal about, we need to go to the nuclear option, so we just need a simple majority of 51 votes, which is exactly what they have right now. But that could change by 1 vote. So ultimately, the only way that we're really going to find a solution is we've got to change the complexion of the House. Fair-minded.
Is there a pun in there?
Yes. We've got to change the makeup. In addition to, could get a bill that has 60 votes that could be filibuster proof in the Senate, but it could still get shot down in the House. And there's that hard right wing of the House, the Freedom Caucus, formerly the Tea Party,
right?
The Freedom Caucus. Right. They could pass a fair-minded bill in the Senate, but that doesn't mean it's going to pass the House, and we're right back to where we started.
So that's a great phrase, right back where we started. Do we end up with another government shutdown in 3 weeks?
I believe so.
Right.
I believe so. And with the funding of the government and some other things off the table, that'll give the Democrats a little bit more breathing room. And like I said, I mean, all they have to do, if the Democrats want to get a good messaging against Trump when he says, oh, the Democrats don't care about people and they don't care about the soldiers and the vets and the military and blah blah blah. All the Democrats have to do is have some of their staffers drive around DC with a smartphone and take video of homeless people and talking about cities. If he can't take care of Washington DC, how is he going to take care of the rest of America? Like you and I had that conversation about what percentage of homeless people are veterans. And we know that there are, all they have to do is start going around DC and talking to homeless people. Are you a veteran? Yes. And then just have a 30-second clip and just plaster that all over social media, and they would bring Trump to the table. But what Trump does, I talked about this before, Trump is a brilliant tactician. He comes to the table and asks for everything that he wants. Trump doesn't come to the table and say, I know the Democrats are never going to give me this, so I'm not even going to ask for this. No, he asks for a 100% of he wants, what he wants, knowing that he knows that the top 20% of things he's asking for, the Democrats are going to say no. So then when he capitulates on that top 20%, it gives the appearance to his base that he's being reasonable. And if he takes off the top 20%, he knew he wasn't going to get that anyway, so he still gets his 80%. Yeah, he's going to ask for $25 billion for the wall because, in essence, he knows it might only cost 10. There are a lot of reports about that, but if he asks for 25 and then the Democrats capitulate and give him 10, he still won because he knew he wasn't going to get what he asked for anyway. So the Democrats need to step up and go to the table asking for everything that they want. They're going to the table like, let's just concentrate on DACA and CHIP right now. The table and ask for everything. Put everything on the table. Then if you say, okay, you're right, we'll take these three things off and concentrate on these two, then at least they can go back. If the deal falls apart, they can say, look, we tried to work with this guy. Work with him.
What do you think of Chuck Schumer's and Nancy Pelosi's leadership?
It's time for Nancy Pelosi to go. That's just flat out. If you look at the Democratic Party right now, you look at Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, you look at the majority of the people who are, if you look at Bernie Sanders, if you look at the majority of the people who are really in control of the Democratic Party right now, they've been there for 30, 40 years. They're septuagenarians, octogenarians. It's time for some new blood. And Nancy Pelosi is such a lightning rod herself just so that she can take that excuse away from, like, I talk to conservatives all the time that just have a visceral hate for Pelosi and Hillary Clinton. And when I ask them why they hate them, they can never give me an answer. But that's the narrative that the Republicans have been putting out there for so long. So she needs to remove herself. She specifically needs to remove herself just because the narrative that's out there is more powerful, or at least it's louder than any good that she's really doing in the House.
Well, as Bakari Sellers tells it, she's excellent at fundraising.
Then let her fundraise.
Right.
Let her fundraise for someone else.
Well, right. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. The reason I asked that specific question is because Chuck Schumer was the most vocal.
And the only reason they sent Chuck Schumer in there, not to cut you off, but the only reason they sent Chuck Schumer in the room was because he's from New York.
Senate minority leader as well.
Right. But I'm saying that whenever they talk about Trump and Schumer getting into a room, they always talk about how they're both
the
from
New York guys, right?
And that kind of thing.
The reason I bring that up is because the one thing that I was not happy with Chuck Schumer was just his lack of fire. When we saw the hearings for the HHS secretary, Cory Booker, he was on fire. That was the type of passion and backbone that the Democratic Party has been sorely in need of. Now, you can say what you want to say about Cory Booker because he did vote for the whole we were trying to get cheaper medications, and he voted against that for whatever the reason. But so he's not a perfect candidate. But in that moment, was a shining example of what the Democratic Party was missing. And when I listen to Chuck Schumer, I see someone who looks and sounds completely depleted. To figure out that, I think that's part of why, again, that messaging for Democrats is not there the way that it should be.
Makeup of the Senate leadership, on a scale of 1 to 10, if the comparison or if the baseline is Mitch McConnell, then Chuck Schumer is fine. Mitch McConnell, I mean, I've only seen Mitch McConnell smile once, and that was in that one ad where he did that creepy slow smile. Going back to the last election. So again, the baseline is different. The makeup of the Senate. The senators they have a little bit more decorum for what that's worth, for as far as the ceremony and pomp and circumstance. But at the end of the day, I would agree with you that we do need some personality. We need somebody who has some showmanship. Again, for all of Trump's faults, he does have a lot of showmanship, and he has the ability to fire up orders.
And that's what frustrates me so much, because Democrats have it on the issues. We have it on the substance. Like you said, that was a brilliant proposal you had when you talk about CHIP, when you talk about the homeless veterans. They could do the same thing. They wanted, Donald Trump he went on TV the other day in Davos and talked about all these regulations. Just go take a trip to Flint. And let's talk about some of the real life impact. Interview some of these families, because we're so busy interviewing Trump voters in Flint, whose kids are now in special ed classes and will be for the rest of their lives.
Exactly.
Who again, people who still to this day can't have good drinking water. Let's take a trip down to Puerto Rico. Let's take a trip down to Texas. Take a trip down to Florida. How can we not take advantage of these obvious missteps? Party that are hurting real people. This isn't just messaging. This is actual substance.
And again, this goes back to my accusation against the Democratic Party being feckless. Washington right now is afraid of being tweeted about. That's how bad, that's how low it has become, that the actual fights are taking place on Twitter. Reflection of the leadership, or if that's more a reflection of the population, of the citizens, that they are allowing the commander in chief to communicate with them in character, blasts at a time, and I'm sure there's some symbiosis there, but the bottom line is that the Democratic Party, the attention span of the average person is very short. Certainly short enough that Donald Trump is able to capitalize on using Twitter as his communication medium. So the Democrats have to find a way to get their message out in small bit-sized pieces. That's one of the problems that happened with Trump and Clinton in this last election, is that whenever somebody would talk about what does Hillary Clinton stand for, they'd say, well, go to her website. She's got a whole white paper, on there on how she's going to. So, and that's not where people are. Trump would just go out there and say, what are we going to do? Build a wall. Who's going to pay for it? Mexico. That you could say that in 10 seconds. And to the point where Mexico has come out scores of times at this point. Presidents saying, no, we're not going to pay for the wall. And that's all. But people remember that slogan. He still gets people to say that today. It's about messaging. It's about and messaging, having the correct messaging is not being trite or being shallow or vacuous. That's getting your idea on a bumper sticker so that people can associate that idea with your brand. And the Democrats just haven't done a good job of that.
To leave it on such a somber note. But I really, unfortunately, don't see a whole lot to be optimistic about. I do hope that Congress gets it together. I hope that Democrats get it together, and that we are able, DACA recipients, the protections that they are deserved. I'll use that word, deserved.
And on that DACA point, just because I think it's important to bring this point up, because while this was going on, I thought to myself, to put 320 million people, to stop the government for 320 million people over 800,000. But then I had to remember the administration that we're dealing with. It's not going to end with DACA. So for those of you who are listening and those of you who are watching who might be saying to yourself, whatever those 800,000, that, so what? There. And all you have to do is just pick a random article. And when I read articles now, I go down and I read the comments, and I've seen comments from right-wing conservative people who say, hey, if you don't believe in this country and blah, 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 whether you're a citizen or not, you can get out.
I read an article just yesterday, and I posted it on Facebook if you want to see this on my wall. Israel, and this was as of January 2nd of this year. That's when I first began to see this. I looked at the dating of the stories. Israel is literally Africa, migrants and immigrants in their country from Africa. You have 3 months to get out. You can either take this $3,500 and go back to wherever they're willing to literally write them a check for $3,500 to leave, or you can go to jail. And my question was to my Facebook community, how long before Trump tries to do that here? So you're absolutely right. It does not stop with DACA. Progressive is all about, it's about helping people and understand and having empathy for people and situations that you may not be in yourself.
Helping people in a situation that you could very easily find yourself.
Right.
Most people are one paycheck away from being homeless. And when you see a homeless person and turn your nose up at them like, get a job, and you one paycheck away
exactly
from moving into a tent next to that person.
Because again, time is against us. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will discuss white evangelical support of this president with Reverend Ronald Bonner. Thank you for listening to Humanity in the Headlines. We'll be right back. Thank you. We are back on Humanity in the Headlines. Thank you for sticking with us. Again, I am your host, Atiba Buchanan, joined by my man, Mr. And so, Dave, we've got a hot segment here. I've been looking forward to this, especially after booking this guest. I am excited about who we have on with us today. With us before, second time back, and we are grateful to have him. He actually sent us a book as well. So we thank him for everything he's done for this show. Joining us right now is Ronald Bonner. How are you today, sir?
I'm well, and yourself?
I am excellent. This is Atiba again with David Seaton. And, Pastor, we are glad to have you on today. We like to have you on for matters concerning and race. You help bring a very unique type of clarity to these conversations, and I'm sure our listeners will greatly benefit from having heard you today. So let's just jump right into it. Um, the past 2 weeks they've been talking very heavily, very clear reporting about our president having an affair, stripper star.
Porn star.
Stormy Daniels, back in 2006, roughly a year after he had been married, and shortly after the birth of his son, Barron, being married to what's his wife, Ivanka?
Melania.
No, Melania. All them names I get confused. Melania. So it was clear that he had not only he not only had an affair with this woman, but that this information was purposely suppressed. Woman, $130,000 in hush money back in October of 2016, right before the election. I don't think many people were surprised to hear that. It wasn't, it really isn't a surprise to hear that he, had an affair with some blonde woman with fake boobs, and that he subsequently would have paid to keep her quiet during the election. None of that is outside of the character that we've known of Donald Trump for so many years. What also kind of wasn't a surprise, but what brings us here today, the evangelical community, specifically the white evangelical community, was asked about their opinion, and a collective shrug. Specifically, Tony Perkins said that he gets a mulligan life for this situation. So that kind of perplexed us, because the white evangelical community has always seemed to want it to intersperse there with politics and promote candidates that were very pro whatever their religious positions were. And now we have a candidate, we have a president who appearances is not Christian at all, and has very few Christian values, at least any that you can visibly see or ascertain or substantiate, and they still support him wholeheartedly. To quote David, a lot of cognitive dissonance in that we're not getting it. I just call it flat out hypocrisy, and I'm hoping that you, sir, can help us understand the situation better.
Is that my cue?
Yes,
That is.
Yeah, I think you nailed it when you mentioned the word hypocrisy. Basically, the evangelical, and I've started referring to them as the evangelicals, because they certainly are not living in a sense of what Christ or the Bible tells us is Christ-like behavior. Paul writes in Ephesians 5, "Be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly beloved children of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." Religious right, or what was once called the moral majority, the same people, they're involved into growing or taking over the term evangelical, group of people who identify themselves in their whiteness, anything in other value, including a Christ-like message of love and cooperation. Understand the Genesis text of 128 to subdue, and consideration that is followed up by, which is not domination. And so this is a group of people who feel that what they think, regardless of what the text, but they hide behind the Bible, the Christian text, sense of moral authority. They are known for this sense of moral authority or piety, but now with their embrace of a president who doesn't display any of these morals, and how they overlook all of his microaggressions, his aggressions against persons of color, against women, against people with disabilities, still embrace them is exposing that is part of this philosophy, this what was once called a moral majority, or the evangelical Christian. Really a church, because to be a church you have to be a follower of Christ, and these people are not following Christ because there's no love ethic to them. And so what we're seeing, I believe, of liminality, the descriptor of evangelical is being used, which is why I'm referring to evangelicals and not evangelicals any longer.
And that's interesting that you use the word piety. Ultimately, the three things that the Republicans care about the most, the Republican Party or the conservative right, tax, low taxes, get rid of regulation, and then they have their religious or social agenda. But when you look at the social agenda today of the conservative movement, it's just the right to discriminate against lifestyle you disagree with, i.e., homosexuality predominantly, life. But that's the cognitive dissonance for me, is that they're espousing these moral beliefs and they've chosen the antithesis of morality to be their bridge to their goal.
Exactly. That's part of the liminality. You thought you had definition of what this group was, but now they're embracing as their leader, as their new Messiah, so to speak, exhibit any of these. The theological consortium, the theological scholarship of Rolls-Royce, would conclude that regarding the period of any Christian ethics, for a president or with this group, you have to come to say there's a vacancy. Love does not live here anymore. Vacuum, this vacancy, is the ideology of this whiteness. Actually, starting in 1493 with the doctrine of discovery, which says can occupy and take land of anyone who's a non-Christian. And so going all the way back to some of their early religious roots of sense of domination, which comes out of this Genesis text of Sadu. And so they have no civility and true humanity, because they don't see others as equal. They only see themselves and their ilk, any form of authority, and is this new Messiah for them, leading them into what they refer to as, make America, building the wall and misogynistic comments that he has made, and the behavior that demonstrates no piety, no Christian ethics, no love for anyone outside of himself. So blind ambition, as you said, it is the opposite of what the word evangelical, which is a Greek word meaning the gospel, and the gospel of Jesus Christ is one about news to those people who are oppressed.
Yeah,
but this is a person who is engaged in creating more oppression for people who are already in the lower economic stratus of our society.
Pastor, I've got to have you comment on this one observation that I've made, and I haven't heard anyone else comment on this, so I'd love to get your perspective. During the Obama administration, the evangelical church basically just took 8 years, and they took every opportunity that they could to try and find some minute way of trying to say that Barack Obama was the Antichrist. Now, we've had iterations of this in the past, that people said Ronald Reagan was the Antichrist because his name was Ronald Wilson Reagan, and all three of those names have 6 letters, and they said it was 666. But they did everything that they could, and you can, for our listeners, you can go on YouTube and just Barack Obama and Antichrist, and you'll see a score of videos out there. But there's one observation that I've made of the Trump administration. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, Lower Manhattan, that he's been trying to fund for $1 billion. And that building is?
It has to be 666.
It is 666. So again, my question is just like if Barack Obama was born on June the 6th at 6 o'clock, they'd be running that in the ground saying, see, it's right there. And here it is, you know, we've got Trump, who his son-in-law has a building with the address 666. And these people are doing they have gone out of their way to say the fact that Donald Trump, it was almost impossible for, no one thought he would become president, and he became president. That's proof. I mean, like, just comment on that hypocrisy.
Yeah, but they're saying it's God's will, and so what they're aligning themselves, again, trying to take a moral perspective, control the masses of people. God has lifted up leaders, always led to liberation. Darius or Cyrus or Moses or even Jesus, whenever these leaders have been lifted up in the Bible to freedom. When you're talking about building a wall, when you engage in creating a tax plan that gives tax breaks to the wealthy that are permanent, or you give a minor tax break to the middle class that's temporary, you're building walls. The wall that he keeps talking about calls to opportunity to put a tax or tariff on clean energy by putting a tariff on, which is now
exactly
taking away opportunities for jobs, but it's also detrimental to the environment. This is not God's work. This is not God's work. That's why I'm referring to them as evangelical. First chapter of Mark talks about unclean spirit. I believe this group, these people who are leaders, the so-called moral majority, are examples of this unclean spirit that is in the church. And with the true message of Christ, which is love and peace and working together, we confront this evil spirit said, what have you to do with us? Are you coming to destroy us? Calls them to come out of and this is what he doesn't cast into the pigs. He just calls them out. And that's what I think the rest of the church has to do, is to call these evangelicals who are espousing these ethics that have nothing to do with the gospel of Jesus Christ, expose them for who they are, show that they are not part of the church. Group of people, they are organized because they are not following any of the steps that Jesus has demonstrated to us as what it means to be a follower of Christ.
This is a Tiba, and I'd like to take it into a little bit different direction, if I may. I'd like to actually quote something. You sent me a piece that you had written, Christianity Alternative Facts, and it was a great read, by the way. Just as an aside, I just love the way you open with calling alternative facts the truth is like calling arsenic alternative salt. You're gonna have to let me borrow that, put that in my back pocket. So that's definitely something I'll be using in the future. But with that said, later in the piece, you say supporters, and you're talking about Trump supporters, see in the 45th president that they could not see in Barack Obama as the 44th is a messianic hope for the restoration of white supremacy and the calming of their fear of its annihilation. The question to you is this: if that is true, if one black president over 8 years, much anxiety and angst, even begin to calculate the damage of 200 years and 43 consecutive all-white, all-male presidents have done to generations of African Americans?
To calculate it, it's a calculus that's beyond my ability to be able to work with. That's why you have such difficulty when you mention words like reparations. So much resistance to even affirmative action, where people want to constantly say that affirmative action is about unqualified and taking the job of a qualified white person and giving it to basically an unqualified. No, it's incalculable. How much damage has been done. It's why a person will now. The fact that they didn't get a contract based on their ability, and they compare themselves to people who have a much larger audience to boycott, but yet there's no mention of them having any social justice issues in the past. There's no mention of them taking a knee or even having any conversation about what's doing things. And this is all part of that has been done to people of African descent for all the time that we have been exposed to the impact of chattel slavery. Back to 1493 with the doctrine of discovery, where the church can take lands of people of color is what led to slaves. So the calculus to that, no, it's extremely difficult. But what, again, with the 45th, and what part of my message is, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Network, 1976, with Howard Beale, the one that says, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not taking it anymore." For him, their angst, he tapped into their fear, and all of this is part of the fact that in 35, America will not have a white people see or believe traditions will be removed. And oddly enough, for the people who've never had power has always came from system or the systemic racism that's part of our society, that's written into our culture, and these people were able to tap into it, and now they're shaking because they feel that they will be totally lost, or some will be obliterated. And when people talk about the 14 words about ensuring basically a white nation for fear, and this is part of what Donald Trump tapped into, using the model that we see in the movie Network, of tapping into people's angst, anxiety, into their fears, and promising them great, which really means America will be white again. But these people are going to understand that America was not founded. It was founded for rich white people, and poor European status or class of white. 1681, Maryland introduces the term white into law so that they can continue to support the wealthy. And all the things that he is doing is supporting the wealthy. And these poor white people are going to see that, realize that they have been bamboozled. They didn't land on Donald Trump. Donald Trump landed on them.
Final question as we let you go, and I love the historical context that you're giving to this, going all the way back to pre-colonization of this continent by Europeans. But here's my final question for you. If the Bible was used as a form of social control to convince white people that they could take anyone's land and take control of the indigenous population therein, if they used the Bible as a form of social control for the African slaves that they brought here and to excuse the genocide of Indians on this continent, fast forward today, and they're using this same Bible to create an evangelical white theocracy, right, is really what it is before us. What's the future? the real future for people of color and their relationship with Christianity is abusing it that they have and are.
I'm going to say that, and I know there's a lot of people who want to point to Kemet and Egyptology and to say that Christianity is basically a rehash of that.
And exactly.
For people that I know God, Christ as we know Christ, this religion in Africa. The greatest theologians, and I can't think of his name now. African people who early Christianity around the words of Christ, inclusive, to be one of love, and where people of all ilks, of all types, are embraced. And one of the great theologians, he talks about the brokenness of our society and offers ways in which we can pull the brokenness back together. I believe that is where Black people are, who are very spiritual people, are looking to heal this country. We need to heal ourselves. Christianity does not prevent us from healing ourselves. The misapplication, the misuse of Christian words and doctrines, that is extremely harmful. But pulling all the way out, which some people suggest, I don't think that's going to be helpful. That's just going to be more divisive. To the words of Christ, liberate those who are oppressed, to set captives free. If we look at the freedom that Christianity offers us from being bound to traditions that are not helpful, if we look to that, we will have a resurgence of a true Christianity based on the ethics of love, together, and to divide and conquer individuals and subdue people. We have seen demonstrated for hundreds of years.
Thank you so much for being on with us today. I don't think we could end it any better than that. I will definitely be in prayer over this president and for our country. And we thank you so much for coming on today and giving us your perspective. Again, I'm sure our listeners very much appreciate the information you've given today. Any closing thoughts, Dave?
Blessings to you.
We will, and we'll be back in touch because I'm sure this won't be the last time this subject will come up around this president. Enjoy your day.
Thank you, sir.
Enjoy yours too. Thank you. Bye.
Well, hey, that's it, Dave. He really put a nice button on that. We've got to stay encouraged. There's still a lot of questions I wanted to ask him. Time was just against us, but it's certainly been, the past couple of years for me as far as dealing with my own Christianity has been a challenge, to say the least. We'll get there.
Black people should not feel, no group of people should feel wrong about intertwining their faith impacts their daily lives. That's my point.
Right.
And we have been conditioned to think, I from my perspective, we have been conditioned to think that somehow, I mean, when you intertwine your faith in your daily life, then it is important who the president is. It is important boss is. It is important, where you live and your health and all those things are intertwined. And I just think that we have been convinced, especially as people of color, that we suffer the things that we suffer, more than the majority because of some failing or some spiritual failing or some misstep that we take, when really it really just comes down to there are a majority of people who are trying to keep as much of their power and money as possible, right, and their wealth, And we've got to make up our minds as a community that if we are going to change our circumstances, we can't wait for people to give it to us. We've got to take it.
Right there, folks. Again, time is against us. We thank you so much for joining us today on Humanity in the Headlines. We thank Mr. Breon Jones, our producer, for another wonderful show. We thank Earl Winfrey for this platform. And we certainly thank all of you for listening, hanging in there with us. Please share the show on Facebook Live to anyone that you think could benefit from this information today. And we will definitely be back next week. Thank you so much for watching Humanity in the Headlines. Have a great week.